Today, I'm going to talk about knowledge management. I love knowledge. I love collecting knowledge and put them into a knowledge base. To me, it is similar to collecting trading cards and put it into the folders. I find satisfaction from doing that. And I've also gone through several different kind of transformation in different organizations. And whenever I experience those transformations, I always ask myself the questions: what should the next generation of knowledge management look like? And so that's why I have a lot of different ideas. So I want to share with you. And because some of them are just ideas, may not be totally practical for you, but at least I love that to be inspiring for you. And also because most of the experience are from my previous experience before I joined Southern Cross. So that's why they are not totally related to Southern Cross, that I need to make it clear. So yeah, I need to do that. And so let me tell you a story. So many years ago, when I was working in software vendors, and knowledge management to me is something like that. I open the share folders, I find different folders for different projects, and I can find even subfolders for different project phases, from project initializations, requirement analysis, implementation, testing, deployment, trainings, everything. So that was what meant to me knowledge management. And to me, it's like it worked quite well as long as you collect all the information, until someday I joined a startup as the BA manager. And then that was my first time going through Agile transformation. And then I was told, due to this Agile's values, because we treasure the working software more than documentation, then it means you can throw away all of your documentations. And then all the thing you need is these things called user story. Because I was new to Agile, I can only follow whatever I was told. And I was also told that in Agile, you should have your product owner to write his user story. So that's why I have my product owners to write his first user story, second user story, so more, and more, up to a stage that my product owners has written over 200 user story for a single feature for me. And then as a BA, the first thing I think about is that whether do I have all the requirements. So that's why I have created an Excel spreadsheet to make sure that I have all the combination of different user types, product types, merchant types, all the types, to make sure I have the complete set of requirements. I see somebody laughing. I think that's very familiar to you, right? But then I realized actually that means I need something on top of those user story, right? And actually, that also means documentation is not just a tool to capture the description and requirement. It is also a tool for you to do different kind of analysis. We do a lot of different kind of analysis, gap analysis, interface analysis. We produce a lot of information and documentations to do that. We produce BPMNs, data diagram. They are not just a piece of information to describe the behavior. It is also a tool for you to do the analysis. When you're drafting those documentations, you are at the same time doing analysis. So that means I realized that is not correct just to have user story. I need to go back to my share folders to have a look to see what are the documentation is still compatible with the Agile mindset and Agile era methodology. And then I find there are many different kind of documentations and different kind of formats. Some of them are like we have high-level requirement, detailed requirement, functional requirement, UI mock-up, a lot of different things. But there's only one thing in common, that is you always have template. Template is basically the kind of thing, it's a reminder to remind you to think about different aspects of your project. So for example, typically you'll find a sections called risk and assumptions, non-functional requirement. So basically the template is trying to remind you to think about risk and assumption and non-functional requirement. And they still exist even no matter what kind of methodology you're using, it still exists. So basically, for example, like when we are doing Agile, being Agile, we still need a risk register, right? So that basically means there are some other kind of documentation is still compatible. But the question is, what are those documentations? You need to find out. And So that's basically what I have so far. We have a deck of user story and some documentations for analysis. And we understand very well, user story is just a reminder to remind you to talk to your product owner or different stakeholders about different user story. But as a matter of fact, when the team is doing the development, all the thing that they are seeing is just a user story. It's all about the details. So very easily, when they start working on the user story, they'll forget about all the conversation they had and just so focusing at the code that he's trying to write. So that's why, as a BA, we need to keep on reminding them of what they're doing. So that's why we need to produce them with some big picture to remind them of what they are actually building and why they're building those functionality. But the question becomes like, so what kind of big picture we should produce for the team? But we just mentioned actually, we have template. They are a good reminder. And there's a very famous template in Agile to me that is called user story. So to me, user story is actually a template with 3 different sections. You are being reminded to think about the users, the action for sure, and the values that we're trying to deliver. And then maybe we can get some clue from seeing this template. For example, like when we look at the users, you're being reminded to think about the users. Maybe there's some context or background, big picture documentation we can produce around the users. So in case your companies at the same time has some kind of like marketing segment information or research information, or if they even produce some personas or user testing, that is very good materials to present it to the team to remind them who those functionalities building for. And action, we talk about action a lot, even back to the waterfall eras. But we could still produce similar kind of documentations. For example, BPMN, we can remind them what is that functionality they're building sitting in the whole end-to-end flow. That end-to-end flow could be an integration flow, core flow, or even workflow to make sure that when they develop that functionality, that still makes sense no matter it's running independently or in a whole end-to-end flow. That is a very good reminder. And actually, you had already been reminded when we say that it's actions, it is not a function. Function is something they're building, but we try to put it as actions because we want you to see from the user perspective. And there are other big picture documentations that we can produce. We can produce customer journey. We have presented yesterday. That is very good customer journey mapping. That is something to remind the team when this user is performing their actions for that user story, where is it sitting at in the whole customer journey to make sure that single action he's performing still makes sense when you see it from the end-to-end flow from the user perspective. So BPMN is normally something more from the system or operation perspective, but customer journey mapping is something more from the customer perspective. And the last thing I want to talk about more is the user story mapping. Because to me, it's a very good tool. It's very useful to me, so that's why I want to talk a little bit more. So instead of having a flattened, prioritized user story, it would make more sense to me to order your story like this. Because the backlog is normally ordered by priorities, but if you see it from top to bottom, you couldn't see what the user is trying to do. So that's why it makes more sense to me if we can lay out this story like this. And actually a single user story is not a very good story because it is at best an action, right? It is not a very good story. For a good story, you will normally have the beginning, the climax, and hopefully a happy ending. So that's why I'll recommend you to lay out the user story from the beginning all the way to the happy ending, such that you understand what the user is trying to do. So to me, that is the story. A single user story is at most an actions. And user story mapping could also be used for prioritizations. So we can put the high priorities user story to the top, and it provides a very good visual aid for you to understand how much the team had developed. For example, in here we say, in this sprint, we're going to produce the first 3 user story. And then we realize that even after this sprint, from the user perspective, maybe it still means nothing to him because he couldn't finish the last step. So this is a very good comparing to the prioritized backlog. You still have no clue if you finish the top 5 story, then what does that mean to the users? You may not know at all. So that's why it is a very good tool, very good big picture to provide to the team. The last reminders from the user story is about the values. So you may have some kind of metrics defined, hopefully. That is how you measure the success. And you may also have analytics to understand how the system is being used. Those are very good big picture and context to provide to the team. And even if we are saying that we have a value statement embedded in the user story, but most of the time it is just a guessing or hope it would be as bad as data-driven decisions to come to this stage. But most of the time, it is just a hypothesis. So that's why it would be better to have a hypothesis statement to tell the team why we are building this functionality, because we believe that by building such functionality for certain people, we can expect certain outcome. And then we can even put the metrics over there to make sure that we measure the success and we can validate it. It is getting more and more important, especially if you will truly validate the outcome and you may have changed your MVP a little bit. If you want to learn from the feedback, you need to put this kind of hypothesis statement such that later on when you change the plan, the team understand why they're doing that. So now we have our template filled in. So those are all good candidates for big picture documentation you could produce for your team. And then we say user story is actually just a template. Then the natural next question would be, do we always need to fill in this template? To me, that is one of the most frequent asked questions. Do we always need to adhere to the format for all of our user story? As a BA, whenever I see this kind of question, I would love to see what are we trying to get from doing that, right? We want to see the values by following that format or standards. And as we said, we put it as a template because we want to remind you to think about the users, to think about the values. So that's why, to me, if you had already reminded the team very well about the users and the values, I don't think it's very important to stick with that format for all of your user stories. And especially if you have some kind of user story like, as a user, I want to search a product such that I can find a product. I don't think you're giving a lot of values by following that standard, so it doesn't matter at all. So I would rather love you to have some kind of big picture documentations to do that. And especially for the values that we're trying to deliver. Within a single user story, it is at most a single actions. The values we can get or the user can get from it is very minimal. So that's why I would love to have big picture documentations instead. Okay, and then we also talk about empowering the team. To me, the origin is possibly from these two things. One of them is the Agile's value, and another thing is from the Agile principle, from the Agile manifesto. We believe that the best solution should come from the team, so that's why we should empower them. But when we say we want to empower them, we talk about it a lot, empower the team. But what do you do to empower them? Do you simply add responsibility to them and expect them to give me the best solution because I just empower you, right? So to me, it doesn't make sense too much. So that's why, don't laugh too much. Because it doesn't make too much sense to me. It's like in order to empower them, you need to provide them sufficient information. It should be a lot of things, but one of the things that we can do for sure is to provide them more information. So going back to the user story, we talk about the what a lot, even back to the waterfall era. And then in Agile, we talk about the who also a lot. And if you talk about the who more and more, the user more and more, and gradually you will adopt design thinking. I hope that would be the natural outcome. And we also talk about the values. We talk about the why a lot. And if we talk about it more and more, and gradually you will adopt lean thinking. And to me, most of the important methodology are already being reminded in the user story format. And we talk about the what a lot back to waterfall era. And I hope we can talk about the who and the why more in Agile, because we want to empower the team. We need to explain to the team why we are building such functionality and who we are building such functionality for, such that they can provide us the best solutions. And so that is so far what I have for knowledge management in Agile. We have user story, documentations, analysis, big picture diagram, and thing. Comparing back to waterfall we have shown in the beginning of the presentations, you can find that knowledge management is already gradually changing from the time in waterfall that is more about the contract, what we promised to do and what we had delivered eventually, to the time in Agile is more about the knowledge to empower them such that they can provide the best solutions, such that they can help us achieve the business goal. Okay, so I finished the first half, and for the remaining parts, I need to change direction a little bit. First of all, don't Google the acronyms. I just made it up to make it more convincing, because I love acronyms. And may I ask how many of you work with development teams? Please raise your hand. Oh, a lot of them. Very good. So it may make more sense to you if you're working with development teams. In Agile, typically you have team, Scrum team, Agile team, whatever you call it, and then they will help you to build those products. And we adopt a lot of different methodology and thinking, design thinking in Agile devs of a lot of things. And at the same time, we as BA, we provide services to the team, but have we applied any thinking or methodology when we're providing our BA services to them? Maybe we can consider BA service as a product. If we consider BA service as a product, that is, to me, is a very good thing that we open up a new horizons. Instead of just having the tool bag we normally have from the BA community, we can borrow a whole new set of toolkit from the products. So if we consider BA service as a product, the first thing I would love to borrow from products is Lean Startup. In Lean Startup, we talk about a lot of things. That is one of the things that I find most useful for BA. So this morning we talk about BA, and do we still need BA for Agile? To me, it's very important if you find your team start to have confusion about what is their responsibility. It would be better if you have a vision statement. When we talk about business analysis, mean defining business need, recommend solution that deliver values. If you're in an organization that you have a full-time product owner who is doing defining business need and validating the values, and then what is left for the BA to do, you need to make it clear. Does that mean that BA should just focusing at the recommending the solution part, or does that mean the BA should work with the product owners, or does that mean any other thing? It could be any other thing, but it would be better if you have a vision statement for your BA team, for your BA chapter, such that we can share the same vision, and then we can define strategies, and then we can define product. That means different kind of services we can provide to the team or to the organization. And you may even come up with a service catalog. We have a lot of capability we can provide to the organizations. If we consider BA service as a product, can we apply design thinking? Have you ever shown empathy to your developers and testers? You know, we talk about customer experience a lot, user experience a lot. Have you ever heard of developer experience? I've heard of it a lot from developers. So it doesn't mean like we need to go through all the steps we talk about in design thinking or design sprints, but at least maybe you can have some interviews with your developers. That's what I actually did previously. Before I talk to the developers, I produce a lot of documentation or specifications about the system behavior, because I believe my developers relied on it to understand the system behavior such that they can enhance it or maintain it. But after the interview, unfortunately, I found out he wouldn't. And he just literally told me his single source of truth is the source code. Source code is his friend, not my documentations. You know, in design thinking, we talk about aha moment. That is my aha moment. Aha, you know, don't need my specification. Okay, it's all right. At least I find out that is not what I should build my documentation for. We also talk about DevOps. DevOps doesn't just mean automations. DevOps means how to bring developments and operation closer. To me, operations could mean support. And so that's why I've invited my support analyst. I even create a persona for him. I take photos of him, even though that is not fictional, it's still a very good persona. And I interview him. I ask him, what are you expecting from my documentations if you can have any kind of requirement? And then I have him to write a single user story. Actually, it's not a single, a full list of user story. And this kind of user story is not like the typical user story you find from your backlog, because the typical user story in your backlog is more like a unit of work. After you finish it, you throw it away. And this kind of user story is literally a story about my users. That is a support analyst. It's for me to understand his need. So that's why I put this list, prioritized list of user story in my knowledge base, and I have him to review this list from time to time. And we also run our BA practice development in an agile way. And from time to time, we may pick some items from different people's backlog to our working backlog. So that's why, to me, it's very important to understand what they need. And there are a lot of tools in the product domain. So anything is about lean. There's a lot of things about lean. And the things that we talk about the most is how to eliminate waste. And so imagine if you're building a website. Normally, you will care about whether there's anybody viewing at all. You may have a page counter, funnels, analytics. You want to know how it is being used. But what if you're building a knowledge base, Wikipedia page? Do you ever care? Is there anybody reading your documentations at all? So who are the customers? I don't think you need to build a funnel and analytics, but at least you need to understand the worthy documentations you have. Is there anybody reading? So there are a lot of points that could help us to eliminate waste. So be concise. Try not to put it too detailed. It is not just about the time you put to produce those documentation. It's also about how efficient the reader could get the information that they need. The searchability is also important. The readability is also important. Please help them to get the information they need as fast as possible. And use more diagram and models. We talk about this kind of, we have more and more models in Agile, so that's very good. If there's anything that could be generated, please generate it so we can lift the efficiency. And don't overanalyze anything. Only do analysis just in time. And that's another thing from Lean. In Lean, we talk about value streams. There are a lot of organizations that they're going through different kind of transformation to realign their organization structures. So traditionally, we may have a different functional team. We may have a team for mobile, one for payment, one for API. And then you may be a BA sitting in the mobile department. You're the functional matter of expert for mobile. But we understand now that that team is at most delivering output. So you need to line up all the functionality in order to produce the values to the customers. So that's why there's a lot of organizations going through this kind of transformation to realign their organization structure. The things that we need to ask ourselves as BA is that, where should BA be sitting at? Should you be still that subject matter expert of mobile, or would you like to be the subject matter of expert for the values? I would love that to be the position for BA. Because a lot of time we have a lot of people who understand that function better than you do, and so, but a lot of time we don't have a lot of people who have the vision to understand the things end to end across different functions. Okay, I think that is the last thing. We talk about Agile a lot. So we talk about Agile being a mindset a lot, but when we apply Agile, we as BA, when we provide our BA service to our stakeholders, to our developers, testers, have we got our mindset change? It is a very good question that you need to ask yourself. So, for example, like we say individual is more important than process. So when you have your BA practice development, are you trying to develop a very rigid process that everybody needs to adhere to, or do you allow certain flexibility? We talk about software over documentations. Do you truly believe your documentation is more important than the software, or the other way around? And we talk about collaboration and contract. So do people still have the mindset of contract? Is there somebody still asking you to put something in your documentations just to protect them? And collaborations. And so that is also the reasons why I asked you to produce more models and diagram, because model and diagram, they are at the same time very good tool to facilitate collaborations. And responding to change, when we talk about continuous integrations and continuous delivery, imagine if someday your team is deploying several changes to the production environment on a single day. So the way you produce your documentations, could you still keep up to the pace? So that's why I would recommend, if there's anything you can generate, please generate. Otherwise, you'll always be in the catch-up mode, catching up with the team. And that's all. I've talked about a lot of smaller, tiny things. So if there's only a few things you can remember from this talk, I would love that to be provide a big picture, because a lot of time we have a lot of people who understand the details, but we normally don't have the big picture. And empower the team by giving them sufficient information, and consider BA service as a product. If you can remember that as best SAP, that may also help. And the last thing, if you still can remember, refer back to Agile Manifesto and user story. You may find a lot of information over there. So that's it. Thank you.